3:36 p.m. Welcome everyone to the Education and Neighborhoods Committee meeting. I'm Paul Krikorian and I'm chair of the committee. I'm joined by Councilmember Dennis Zine. This is Tuesday, February 23rd. Thank you all for making the time to be here, and we will come to order. There are two items on today's agenda. Item 2, for those of you who are here specifically for that, we will be continuing due to the urgency that revolves around item number 1, and the fact that item number 1 will certainly take all of the allotted time that we have for today. We'll also be taking general public comment at the end of the meeting rather than at the beginning, because we want to get right to business on agenda item number 1. So let's proceed with that now.
Item number 1 is a motion Smith-Rosendahl relative to canceling the process for city clerk conduct of neighborhood council elections and the transfer of unspent and uncommitted funds to the reserve fund. This item is also scheduled for council February 24th.
Thank you, and I'd like to ask the clerk as well as Dunn's representative to come up, and for our city attorney representative, will it be Mr. King? Will you be?
I think my colleague Gwen Poindexter
okay.
is joining us.
All right, thank you. All right, welcome everyone. As you know, we're here to talk about the possibility that was proposed in a motion in council by council members Smith and Rosendahl to alter the current election schedule let me take that back, to alter the conduct of neighborhood council elections that are upcoming between now and June, and take the responsibilities for the administration of those elections away from the city clerk in order to realize cost savings. So I thought we would begin, Madam Clerk, if we could, with a very brief overview of how it is that the city clerk has now been tasked with the responsibility of conducting the elections, and what the history has been from the time that first occurred until now, just as far as the process by which you were asked to conduct neighborhood council elections.
I'll give a very brief summary, and then I'm going to ask Arlene also to pitch in, because a lot of this happened before I was city clerk. But basically, when the new charter established the neighborhood council system, and that went on for a while, the Neighborhood Council Review Commission also met a few years after the neighborhood council system had been in place. The charter says that elections shall be handled by the neighborhood councils themselves with the assistance of Dunn, quote unquote. So it doesn't say that they do it all on themselves, but it doesn't say that Dunn does it all by itself. It's each neighborhood council does it with Dunn's assistance. There was a period of time when the neighborhood councils were doing it on their own. There was also a period of time when Dunn assisted using independent election administrators to assist.
These are outside contractors?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It was found, however, that being a new experimental concept and not too much precedent, there were a lot of issues that developed and a lot of concerns, being such that the city council deliberated after hearing back from a lot of the neighborhood councils that it might be advisable to put them all under one system and move the authority for only the elections of their board members, nothing else to do with what the work of the neighborhood councils is, under the city clerk, who is the election administrator for the city's municipal elections. So the city clerk ran 22 neighborhood council elections in 2008, learned a lot, took back a lot of input, developed templates, and realized that in 2010 we would be faced with a much larger challenge of running the neighborhood council elections for all the neighborhood councils. At the time it was 89. Westwood came in late at the 90th. So what we are seeing is an evolution or a coming full circle of neighborhood councils doing their own, neighborhood councils doing them with the assistance of Dunn, who helped out with independent election administrators and also their own staff, having it moved to the city clerk, and now with the motion that was presented by council, moving back out of the city clerk and then back to the beginning of the cycle.
So let me just summarize briefly the history then. September of 2007, the clerk's office was asked to take over these election process on a partial basis. In 2008, 22 of the 89 councils, about 25% or whatever that works out to, of the council's elections were conducted by the clerk's office, and some systems were developed in that process. Presumably some of those systems would be carrying over into the 2010 elections. Lessons learned, policies developed at that time would be carrying over into the 2010 elections as well.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. Mr. Kim, can you talk a little bit about prior to September of 2007, what were the challenges that Dunn faced in administering and helping to administer the elections, and then what role did Dunn play in the 2008 cycle with regard to the other elections that were not conducted by the clerk?
Thank you. Bangwan Kim, Neighborhood Empowerment. As Madam Clerk had provided you a brief history, neighborhood councils were on their own for conducting their own elections, and that turned out to be unworkable. So we were asked to get involved. And
unworkable in what respect?
Frank Martinez, city clerk at that time, put together a task force to create a citywide election procedure, which included Dunn administering elections, but because neighborhood councils felt they needed to have some distance from the city in terms of being able to conduct their elections, we created these positions called independent election administrators, who handled basically what the city clerk is doing. Our role was really more of coordination, helping with printing, also helping them some with ballot design. So that it's a mix. It was a mix of functions that is now being housed in the city clerk's office.
Okay. And the IEAs, the independent election administrators, presumably those were not volunteers.
They were paid consultants for our department, and
right.
They did the work that, again, the main role was to keep a distance from the city, and they were independent consultants that were working more closely with the neighborhood councils. So we did that. Our department was never designed to be election administrators, and so we did the best job that we could, but there were complaints. And when those complaints rose to such a level, at the same time there was a neighborhood council review commission that was established in the charter to review the past successes and failures of the neighborhood council system. They recommended to the city council, and the council adopted the recommendation that the city clerk take over the elections to allow both the elections to be run by a professional department that is in charge of elections, but also to free up the department to focus more on empowerment agenda. That is the true purpose of our meeting. So at the same time that the city clerk was conducting the 22 elections, we were administering probably about 29 of the remaining elections for that fiscal year. And then as of a certain time, we went completely over to the city clerk's office.
Okay. Now, since the council made the decision in 2007 to at least partially transfer authority for administering elections to the clerk, what has been the change in your staffing level since late 2007 within Dunn?
As part of that transition, 4 positions were deleted from our department, and about $400,000 in operating expenses that we used to pay for some outreach expenses, translation, facility, rental expenses, and the IEA costs. That was presumably used to pay for the city clerk to take over the elections.
And then beyond the assigned elections personnel and funding levels that you had relating to the elections, setting that aside for the moment, overall you've had a more than 40% staffing reduction within the department in those 2.5 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, Madam Clerk, if you could pick up now sort of with where we are in the process now and give an overview of what has been done in anticipation of these 89 plus 1 elections and where you are actually in the completion of those various tasks.
Okay, for the past calendar year, we have been in planning mode for the 89 neighborhood council elections, which are actually going to begin next Tuesday. Next Tuesday is our first region elections, March 2nd. So that amount of time was necessary to do an extraordinary list of different types of tasks, developing stipulation documents, meeting with each of the neighborhood councils to get input, ballot development, polling selection. Arlene, you can fill in a little bit on the types of things that we've done, and then I'll go over there today.
Okay. So basically, a lot of the tasks that have been completed to date were things that we learned from our 2008 experience. The fact that many of the bylaws were missing some of the specifics we needed in order to conduct the elections. There's some ambiguity, some things that need to be clarified, and because of that, we developed things such as the stipulation worksheet and some default values where things weren't defined. And up to this point, we've just been going through the process of clearly identifying all of the election procedures for each of the neighborhood councils, defining, where their residential or business areas are, mapping this out, setting up the tools we're going to need to quickly register all the stakeholders, verify their status, and get them the correct ballots. We have actually been able to develop a system that allows us to go from the candidate filing process. We can enter the information and verify it through interactive maps that are a part of the process, feed that into a system that we use to then post the candidate names on the website.
And excuse me, on that point,
Yes.
the complexity there is due to the fact that you have different definitions of stakeholders for different neighborhood councils, different factors that would qualify one to be a participant in an election or a candidate in an election for each of the 89 neighborhood councils. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Each neighborhood council, there were some things we were trying to standardize, but other things that we are...
As far as process was concerned.
Right, exactly.
Not standardization in terms of who were stakeholders, or you didn't play any role in that, but you were trying to come up with standardization for the election process itself. Okay.
Forms and such.
Now, in addition to that, you've identified at least 89 polling places throughout the city that you've secured as well for those elections.
And
correct?
we've made field visits. We have an accessibility survey that it's a comprehensive checklist that we develop for the municipal election, so we can verify that people can easily access the polling place, there's adequate parking available, and things such as that. So up to this point, we've been doing, as June Legme said, all of the preparation work in terms of making sure the polling places are adequate, the procedures are in place, the ballots have all been printed for the first election, the candidates, they've all been verified, and we're ready to go for Tuesday's election. In the meantime, while
When is the first election?
Tuesday, next week.
Tuesday of next week.
Yes.
Let me make sure I'm clear on that. The first election pursuant to the system that the council set up beginning in September of 2007 is next Tuesday.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then after next Tuesday, what will be the schedule for upcoming neighborhood council elections?
Well, even, then we have elections scheduled approximately every other week, though there's some variation because we had a lottery to determine the order, but each of the regions chose which particular day of the week they wanted to conduct their election. So depending on if they chose the Sunday or the Saturday, sometimes there's smaller or larger gaps between the elections. But for the most part, we tried to schedule them 2 weeks apart. And at the same time, we are conducting, say for Region A, the first round of elections, at the same time we're preparing for those elections, we're also doing the candidate filing for the other elections that are coming up. We're processing vote-by-mail applications. We're preparing and finalizing the election procedures for some of the later regions. So there's a great overlapping of all the various processes for each of the 9 regions.
Okay, when will the last of the elections take place under the current schedule?
June 26th.
Now, the original budget for the clerk-administered election process was approximately $4 million in this budget year?
That's what we requested. And that is the amount that we originally requested, and that would have included comprehensive vote by mail and, beg your pardon? Oh, yes, the aggressive outreach campaign. That amount was subsequently trimmed to $1.9 million, and that is what we are working with now.
And that trimming was as a result of council's consideration of your budget proposal and an affirmative decision to go forward with a $1.9 million budget by a vote of the council.
That is correct. In light of the fiscal situation that was already showing its a bad face at that time, and also hoping that the neighborhood councils would make up the difference with an aggressive volunteer workforce to help with the poll work and other such, and also saying that such costly items as the vote by mail and the outreach were just too costly and should be therefore outreach was specifically given over to Dunn.
So it is the case that the council, working with you, has already trimmed $2 million off of the proposed cost of these elections.
That is correct.
Okay. Before we go on to options that are available to us for addressing this specific motion and future ordinances, I don't want to monopolize this. I want to give Mr. Zine an opportunity to chime in if you have questions about the history part, and then we're going to come
Well,
back.
I know the history.
You know it very well.
One of the vice chair of the Elected Charter Reform Commission. When it was established, there was no vision of the complication, no vision of millions of dollars in the process for elections. It was like we have our homeowner groups, Sherman Oaks homeowners, Woodland Hills homeowners, Tarzana property owners, nice, smooth, everybody gets along, doing community activities. So the complication that we're faced with now with the expenditure of dollars, and I think there'll be some savings if we don't continue with the clerk's office, but I think if you balance that with the cost that has gone through for the notifications, the publications, it just turns into more of a comedy act than what it needs to be is a serious empowerment of the communities. So, I mean, I've pondered this, but I think that the time frame, as the chair knows, I mean, we're talking about a week away from today and a weekend in there, a Saturday and Sunday. So I don't see how we can honestly, realistically scrub what's already been spent, scrub, and decide to do it in another fashion. I think down the road we can reevaluate, but my position on it, with the cost, the inconvenience to the community, and we can debate this forever, but I don't think that there's any other option since it's so late in the period for the elections that we pursue. We complete the elections on Tuesday, we get the results, and then before we go the next, and I don't know when the next one's going to be.
2 years hence, sir.
2 years, okay.
Oh, I'm
2
sorry.
2 weeks.
The next cycle.
This cycle.
Okay, the
is
cycle,
next
that's what I
cycle,
mean,
But
this-
after this year is done, 2 years hence.
Right, but then after March, what happens after that? After 2 weeks, and then how many more? How many more months?
Starting with March 2nd, we will have approximately every other week an election through June 26th.
And if
So
we already completed paper and notification and ballots, et cetera?
we will be doing that on an overlapping basis. We're ready for the first group. Once the first group is during elections, we will start the ballots and so forth for the next one. So it's going to be tiered all the way down to the end.
But have we already started any printing costs?
Oh, yes.
So that's what I'm saying, is that we'd have to scrub all that and start all over, which means we tear down more trees and burn more forests.
And I guess it begs the question of who is we? Because it's not going to be the clerk.
Well,
Will it be the neighborhood councils? Will it be done? Will it be IEAs?
I think we do a disservice to the city, the image, the reputation, the neighborhood councils themselves, those folks that are involved. I know Ms. Krikorian and my districts have a lot of participation by people who are involved. We've both been flooded with emails regarding this and the funding on both issues. And I know how much anxiety, concern there is in the community for those folks that want to see it happen in a manner that's appropriate. So, I mean, I made up my mind to continue with it through this cycle. And then we reevaluate. I know that the mayor's made a proposal to fold Dunn into CDD, et cetera, which is a whole other subject, but I don't know any option other than staying the course that we're on. We've already spent a lot of money on it. Why do we then derail and then start all over with additional expense, additional costs, and who knows what's going to do it? Who knows who's going to do it? So, I mean, I'm committed to, Mr. Chair, to leave it as it is for this particular cycle, in addition to this coming Tuesday and the others that follow, and then we go back to the drawing board and figure out. We'll have a 2-year period of time to figure out how we want to do it, and our chair will be here for 12 years, so he'll be able to see it. While I'm in Hawaii,
Thank you.
plucking the pineapples.
For your information, Mr. Chair, by our count, neighborhood councils have spent over $100,000 of their funds on outreach materials for the elections.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zine. And I think in light of your comments, we may be able to abbreviate some of this process, but I do think, just for the sake of making sure that the picture is clear to everyone, that I would like to hear from the city attorney. As the law stands right now, if the council were to vote tomorrow to change the authority for administration of these elections, how soon could that take realistic effect? And what would be the clerk's obligations in the meantime?
Gwen Poindexter, Assistant City Attorney. How long it would take to prepare the ordinance, of course, is an internal dynamic of the City Attorney's Office, but even assuming a 30-day turnaround, then you're looking at the ordinance being effective another 30 days thereafter. And meanwhile, the clerk is still obligated to continue their functions while they have the authority on the books. So repealing the ordinance is not something, in my opinion, that could be done immediately. And repealing the ordinance also includes looking at the plan and probably amending the plan to accommodate this new system that wouldn't necessarily accommodate a backup plan, which, in my opinion, would need to be in place if you're going to repeal the city clerk's authority.
So, just for clarity then, there's at least two options. One would be to simply just repeal the existing ordinance, but even that would take until the end of April or so, and the clerk would continue to do what she's been mandated to do between now and April, including the expenditure of city funds.
Correct.
But then the secondary part of what you've said is that aside from rescinding the existing ordinance, repealing the existing ordinance, the council could, and in my view should, if they were to go that route, also come up with additional ordinances to govern the administration of the elections, or else the neighborhood councils would be left with no structure whatsoever for
Correct.
the elections. Is that what you're?
That's what I mean.
Okay,
Exactly.
great. And so, if we were to enact additional enabling or implementing ordinances, presumably that would take time even beyond that deadline.
Correct. And not to mention, and this has come very suddenly, so I'm sure I haven't analyzed all the potential legal pitfalls, But the first thing that's apparent to me is that because we accommodate a system where the city clerk is administering the elections, we also provided the mechanisms in the neighbor council's bylaws that accommodate that structure. So none of the neighbor council's bylaws have any reference to their own election dates, their term limitations, any of the rules that we sort of standardize over them, and so they'd have to start from scratch in developing those mechanisms themselves with a body that we presume still has a board, but because of the nature of extending their terms to these dates, it's not entirely legally clear. It's something we'd have to look at as well.
And that is an important point,
It is
because
indeed.
some of the existing boards are now at the expiration of their legal term.
Exactly.
And so if there's no election on a timely basis to replace them, then the question would be, what is the status of those holdover board members? Do they continue to have any power, or does the board simply cease to exist because the term is expired?
That's
And
exactly-
and we don't have a clear answer on that.
Not at this point.
Okay. So, and the issue in the bylaws is that the neighborhood councils, in reliance on the expectation that the clerk was going to go forward, have deleted these elections provisions that should have been irrelevant because the clerk was going to be administering the.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, if we assume that timeline, Madam Clerk, that you would continue with your assigned responsibilities for administering these elections through the end of April, how much of the $1.9 million would have been spent by the end of April? What would be your expectation?
Our best guesstimate is if council were to simply repeal the ordinance that gives me authority to run the elections with no alternative election system, which would be a quicker ordinance to write, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's pretty much ordinance XYZ is hereby repealed. I mean,
Well, a little more to that. We have to look at some of the other companion ordinances.
and make sure that you clean all the
Correct,
books out.
exactly.
But that would be the fastest way, just pull me out of it and have no other system in place. That I would envision once, first reading ordinance, second reading ordinance, mayor has to be given time to sign. We have to have time to publish, let the 30-day publication period go, period. It could be anywhere from $600,000 to $1 million. That's if I'm pulled out with no structure and back. If,
I'm sorry,
however,
$600,000 to $1 million would have been spent by then?
No, would
Or
have
that
been
would be the
saved.
realized savings?
realized savings. If, however, as Gwen indicated, the more thorough method of pulling the clerk out of the elections but providing for an alternative system necessarily takes more time to develop those ordinances and then get them through the legislative process, first reading, second reading, mayor sign, publication, we're looking at between $500,000 and $700,000 savings.
Savings, okay. And Mr. Kim, if the clerk were to be removed from the responsibility of administering these elections by the end of April or sometime thereafter, if there are additional ordinances, what would be your expectation of how the elections could then be administered, and what would be the costs associated with administering them, and who would bear them?
Well, if we were directed by council to do the elections as we had been conducting them, minimally, we would require 2 to 3 full-time staff people to do the coordination and the management, and another $250,000 in direct operating costs to pay for the independent election administrators and some minimal outreach expenses and facility costs.
So if we were to achieve $500,000 or $600,000 in savings, somewhat more than half of that would be consumed by the alternative method for administering the elections?
Correct. I think the equivalent would roughly be about $500,000 in terms of staff costs. And
That would be the
operating costs.
alternative costs of continuing under a different scheme.
Correct.
So if that were the case, that would consume the entirety of the savings then?
Yes, unless, of course, the third option is leaving neighbor councils to do their elections completely on their own, which would then have some timeline implications, but that would be a more costly way for the council to do it. But it's not something that I would recommend because, as Madam Clerk had suggested, it's going back to the very beginning that required the city to come up with some kind of standardized official way to conduct the elections.
And would the city attorney's office have concerns about issues of equity and potential liability if half of the neighborhood councils had elections monitored by and administered by the city clerk, and then the other half of neighborhood councils after April 30th were left to fend for themselves at their own expense?
Yes, we would have some concerns about that. How that would translate in liability, I can't quite answer that, but we definitely have the equity concerns. And I should point out as well that when the neighbor councils were doing the elections on their own, because they were city entities, there were some rules that we felt needed to apply to neighbor councils, such as having their polling place in an ADA compliant facility, such as not using the city seal for the individual candidates to use to make it look like it's an endorsement of the city. Things of that nature were happening because there were no regulations, at which point the city council did step in and adopted some neighbor council election procedures, which form the basis of the city clerk's current ones.
Mr. Stein, anything?
Mr. Krikorian, may I
Yes.
offer an observation? What you and Gwen have picked up on very astutely is the fact that the ideal situation, if you were going to quit the clerk running the election, is before any one region got started. In other words, everybody is administered by the clerk or nobody's administered by the clerk. So the difficulty comes in that because the elections start next week and then continue every 2 weeks thereafter, is that precisely as you said, some will come under the clerk's administration and others will not. But beyond the equity issue, the clerk's office would have questions of our own, such as the ones that we do conduct, and then the repealing ordinance comes down and cuts us off. Do we handle the election challenges for the elections that we did administer? Do we handle recount requests for them? Some of them, what if the repeal comes down at the point where the day of that election, are we allowed to finish canvassing? Are we allowed to announce the vote if we are no longer the election administrator? And what I hope would not happen is the neighborhood councils who are at the bottom of the list, more toward May and June, may think that if they appeal to the clerk to move up the calendar before the repeal comes down, we will not be able to handle them, if we start moving them from the lower register up to the upper register. These are just kinds of questions that we would need answered also.
And for that matter, if the authority were repealed, who would be the appropriate agency to resolve election disputes or challenges? Would there be a city agency in place to do so?
No, because...
So presumably that would be then left to the courts to resolve.
Presumably.
Okay. Mr. Zine, anything else? For public comment?
Are we going to hear from public and then
We're
we'll
gonna take
move
public
forward?
comment and then we'll go.
Okay. All right.
Go
Good.
ahead and
Very well.
Okay. If there, yes, please.
Sorry. It was brought to my attention one additional point, which is for Region A, the vote-by-mail ballots have already been sent out. So,
When do they count those?
I'm sorry?
Region A, when do they count Region A?
We'll count them, we'll combine them with the at-polls ballots
Next week,
Next week.
Tuesday.
next week.
And when do those ballots go out?
They went out as early as 30 days prior to the election, depending on when the application was received.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We will now take public comment on this matter. Thank you all very much. The first speaker, and let's, because we have a lot of cards here, if you wouldn't mind, we'll keep it to 1 minute, and then we will also have general public comment. So if you don't finish in your 1 minute, you want to come back for general public comment, that's great. Let's start with Glenn Bailey. And then the next speaker will be Frank Appleby.
Glenn, I said we'd put you at the end, but since you're here, I didn't want to think we were tricking you. Now you can go back to the other one.
Thanks. I may just do that, unless you solve it here. Council members, thank you very much. First of all, our neighborhood, Glenn Bailey, Encino Neighborhood Council, we handled 5 elections on our own with Dunn's assistance, but we arranged the polling place ourselves, no cost to the city. We, an independent election administrator, maybe you paid someone $200 for working the 6 hours. That would be $18,000 for the 90 neighborhood councils. That's the independent person you need to have there. Everything else, we had 100% volunteers. And as you probably both heard from my email, in Region A, the West Valley and the North Valley, 0 volunteers have been recruited and placed into any of those 11 neighborhood councils. That's outrageous. That was contrary to the promise that was made at this committee last May by the city clerk. That your committee and the council directed that volunteers be used to supplement to save costs. So I'm not saying we should not have the elections, but I think we could save the city a lot of money if you proceed with the elections and actually use the volunteers that you're directed to do. And this is a full employment act for the city clerk, I think.
Thank you. Next speaker is Frank Appleby, followed by Barry Johnson. Mr. Appleby.
Hello. Thank you, council members. I'm Frank Appleby. I'm from the Westwood Neighborhood Council Transition Committee. We're in a unique situation because we don't have a board. We don't have any money. We couldn't possibly run an election on our own. We need the clerk to run the election, and we're on the 26th. So we would basically just be left out there hanging. And we have no outreach money, nothing. And so we really need the support of the clerk to help us run this election.
26 of what?
June.
June, okay.
So we're the last one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Barry Johnson, followed by Roxanne Stern.
Hi, Barry Johnson, Studio City Neighborhood Council stakeholder. It seems to me like, and I'll say present company exempted, but we have several council members and a mayor who would like nothing better than to see the neighborhood council system go away altogether. And it seems like there's an awful lot of time and effort being devoted to nitpicking the budget, various budgets, be it election or the general budget given to us, taken away, and we are such a small drop in the bucket compared to the overall city budget. It just seems suspicious to me that so much time is being spent on taking away so little, what will realize the city in so little amount of savings. And I just was going to say, in less than 10 years, neighborhood councils have really become a vital service to community and community members. And I really don't want to see the rug pulled from it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Roxanne Stern, followed by Billy Hayes. Ms. Stern.
Good afternoon. I'm Roxanne Stern. I live in Westwood. I'm a Westwood resident, and I was a part of the formation group for the neighborhood council, and now I'm on the transition team for the neighborhood council. And as Frank said, we have no money. And without the help of the city clerk, we will not be able to get started. And I'm sure you're aware of the battle that we fought to get where we are now. And here's another hill. We need help to get over that hill. And we do need funds to do that. And I think from what we heard here today, that whatever we do should be done after this session of elections. And coming the next 2 years, in 2012, we should have in place how we want to handle it. So please keep the city clear.
Thank you. Next speaker is Billy Hayes, followed by Marilyn White-Seidel.
Yes, my name is Billy Hayes with Foothill Trail District Neighborhood Council. I'm chair of Rules and Election Committee. And I'm just happy to hear today from you two guys some reasoning and really asking some serious questions about the election and why it would be a disaster to pull it. I would hope the entire council would look at it in those terms and not this knee-jerk reaction. And we're talking about having neighborhood councils finance the elections. Well, the city is also pulling away the rollover money where some neighborhood councils have prudently spent their money, they're saving money, and now the city is taking that money away. So The neighborhood councils have worked on behalf of the neighborhoods, and the city council, like the previous gentleman said, is seen to be the enemy of the city, and instead of being viewed as a friend of the city, a friend of the community, and a friend of the neighborhoods. And I think that's what's really being lost in this whole discussion.
Thank you. The next speaker is Marilyn White Seidel, followed by Jay Handel. Marilyn?
Hello, I'm Marilyn White Seidel. I'm a stakeholder in Studio City, and I'm the liaison to our 4 schools in Studio City, and I was put to that post by our neighborhood council. You know, you're talking about unspent and uncommitted funds to the reserve fund. I don't think there is a reserve fund, and I don't think we should put any money into the city coffers when they couldn't hold on to a dime that we gave them before. And so I'm dead set against this. We should be allowed to live, breathe, and do what we do. We take care of our schools. We bought and partnered with the group at Rio Vista School to put books in their library. We take care of sick kids for the district, and I think we should be allowed to live.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jay Handel, followed by Heinrich Kiefer.
Did he leave or did he go to the other meeting?
He's already been on the other meeting, I think.
All right.
All right, we'll put him in the back of the pile and call him again when we get there. I'm sorry, is it Mr. Kiefer or Mr. Kiefer?
Thank you, Kiefer.
Kiefer, sorry about that.
Thank you, Heinrich Kiefer. I'm a 30-year resident with Highland Park. I've had a business there for about 20 years, and I served about 8 years on the neighborhood council. And I'm just trying to hold this thing together. You know, truth, transparency, teamwork. You know, these are the things we need to bring to the table, to the city. Many of us in this room have spent countless hours working for free to try to build this system, and it does seem as though the mayor's trying to destroy it. So I support your actions. I oppose the item 1, and it sounds like we have your support to vote that down so that the city clerk can maintain the elections through at least this cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Charles Lindenblatt, followed by Judy Price. Mr. Lindenblatt, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm with the Mid-City West Community Council. I'm the election committee chair. I'm speaking entirely for myself at this meeting here. I would urge you to oppose this, as you have, the motion to move the funds into the over into the general fund, because a number of us, in working with the city clerk to prepare for these elections, have dwelt with various issues, prepared materials and so forth to be considered by our boards and approved by our full boards and so forth that were inputs into the city clerk's process over time. And a lot of us, you know, put tremendous effort into that, and it would be it'd be very unfortunate and just the wrong thing to do to pull the plug on it as it is right now. And so there's plenty of time to see for 2012 what would happen, but I think for 2010 the election should go forward as planned. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Judy Price, followed by Chris Rowe.
Hi, I'm Judy Price. I'm with the Greater Valley Glen Neighborhood Council. I'm a stakeholder. I serve on their Rules and Bylaws Committee, and I've done the election procedures through 2 done elections and through the city clerk election in 2008 and for this year. I'm really opposed to this, and quite frankly, I think that the neighborhood councils in Greg Smith's area should take him out to the woodshed. I mean, I think this is the most ridiculous idea in the world. The city clerk has already gotten underway with these elections. It's a disservice to the neighborhood councils and to the stakeholders. Our neighborhood council board has been extended to accommodate the city clerk elections, and now it's going to be extended again. You know, that's really not fair. I am not for city clerk conducted elections. I really think Dunn did it better, but I do think it has to continue this year. And please neighborhood councils in Greg Smith's area, you should please contact him and oppose this, because if they only need a majority vote tomorrow, we're in trouble.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris Rowe, West Hills Neighborhood Council, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself. But I am involved with the Elections Committee for our Neighborhood Council. West Hills has had 2 candidate forums. I've passed a flyer over here that shows our elections are next week. My next door neighbor, the only way you can vote by mail is in the city right now is if you're truly disabled, and my neighbor is actually in the hospital having knee surgery right now. So she got a vote by mail, and so she's already mailed it back. One of the problems with that is that they did not send any candidate statements with it. And she thought, said vote for 25, she'd vote for 25, and so she voted for everybody on the slate. So, but the reality is that not only has the city clerk expended the money, but the neighborhood councils did have to do their own outreach, which means that we have banners. Councilmember Zine, when you come by West Hills, go down Vano and in front of Shadow Ranch Park, we already have our big banner hanging up, vote here next week. And we already have yard signs in front of there, and we have them in front of our own homes. Thank you.
Not on the parkway.
Thank you.
That's a violation.
Before we proceed with regular public comment on this matter, I see that Mr. Abrams is here, and I understand that there was a recommendation made by the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. If you could come up, sir, and please offer your comments.
Al Abrams, Vice President, Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. Thank you very much, council members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. The Board of Neighborhood Commissioners just completed a 1.5-hour special meeting, and one of the 2 items was the discussion and possible recommendation of the board with regard to a possible emergency ordinance that might be placed as a motion in front of the City Council to pretty much strip the authority of the city clerk from the upcoming neighborhood council elections and to sweep the funds that would be unspent back into the general fund. The commission took testimony, had a discussion, and they've come up with a motion which they have passed unanimously, which is to oppose any stopping of the city clerk managed elections and to enthusiastically support the elections as they are all the way through to the end until I guess it's the end of June to when they will be completed. It was very important to the commission that we don't change horses in midstream. A significant amount of money has been spent. We've got candidates ready to go, putting their hats in the ring. The West Valley is one of the big areas next Tuesday, and we have some extraordinarily wonderful candidates. We have people ready to go to the ballot. It's the electoral process that is the cornerstone and foundation of our democracy. I wouldn't want to see a black eye in the city pulling the rug out of elections.
All right.
What about
Thank
the
you.
second part?
The second part, the other issue had to do with getting testimony on the proposed reorganization plan by the mayor, which was submitted yesterday. We took testimony on that as well from Deputy Mayor Larry Frank. We took testimony on it from Ms. Jane Usher from the City Attorney's Office. And what we have asked and what we are going to do is to, number one, ask that the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners be closely involved in the continuing evolution of that proposal. We have a resource of great commissioners who are experienced, who are have a history of working with neighborhood councils. Number two, we're asking that neighborhood councils themselves be allowed to have input during this evolution of this plan. And three, we have asked that the City Attorney's Office provide the commissioners with a finding as soon as they're able on the legality of the reorganization itself with regard to the charter language and with regard to the other ordinances.
Thank you, Mr. Abrams. And before that sparks a lot of public comment on this issue, that's not on our agenda
Correct,
for
but I
today's hearing, but we
responded to
will
the
be
council.
hearing it at next week's committee meeting, we will be hearing.
And we'll be happy to respond to that. I just wanted to respond to the councilman's
Yes,
question.
absolutely.
Thank you very much for the
Thank you very much for
opportunity.
being
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker on agenda item 1 is Nina Royal, followed by Barbara Monahan-Burke.
I have
Hello.
a letter here from, that's official from our neighborhood council president stating not to change at this time. And my name is Nina Royal. I have been on the Sunland Tujunga Neighborhood Council 3 years before its inception, when we were in ad hoc for 3 years, and then we were certified in 2004. I've been on that council all this time. During that time, we've never had any problem with our elections. We had a lot of volunteers. We had good turnouts. However, I am just adamant that best practices says that you should not change the horse in the middle of the race. It's absolutely imperative. Our elections are the 27th of March. People have already paid, neighborhood councils have already paid for advertising in my newspaper. And we've been doing that even though supposedly the clerk's office was going to handle all that, and then with the downgrading of the budget and all of that, that didn't happen. So we've already put out money. Money has already come out of our pockets for funding for this election, so you'd be doing double jeopardy to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Barbara Monahan-Burke, followed by Mary Garcia.
Good afternoon. Studio City Board Member and Government Affairs Co-Chair. For this election cycle, keep the city clerk. Otherwise, we would have chaos and disastrous situation for our neighborhood councils and the city, and we don't want that, and I'm sure you don't either. It is essential to have various stakeholders. I want to put a note in here. Categories be able to be voted on by the individual category stakeholder only. This has come about as, at least in our neighborhood council, as a way to avoid having a particular group take over a neighborhood council. And we have put this in for this cycle as a way to do that because a couple of times we have had takeovers happen. So these individual categories voted on by those category holders only are very important. And I'll echo Nita to do with the budget. We're working with our budget tonight to do with the election cycle. We put anywhere, ours is close to $7,000 in the outreach. So we're all working on these. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mary Garcia, followed by Lydia Grant.
Good afternoon. I echo, of course, what you've already heard. I feel that we should go forward with the elections as planned. Prior to being with the city clerk's office, our elections ran very well. So when we did have our first election with the city clerk's office, I was amazed at having 6 city people working at my election. I do the polls for the city and the county when there are 3 of us for a number of people in the city of Los Angeles. So I thought that was completely overdone, and shall we say a lot of people on a weekend made a fair exchange of money, perhaps. But in any case, I'm just here to echo what you've already heard. I think that we should go through with what's already been planned. I think it'd be just horrible to pull out now for the city and for, of course, all the people that are involved and have worked so hard to get here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Lydia Grant, followed by Ivan Spiegel.
One of the things that I wanted to mention, I'm in complete agreement in leaving the elections the way they are till the end of June, but I'd like to give you another reason of why that's important. Many of the neighborhood councils who have soon upcoming elections, such as ourselves, have had problems with the city clerk's office and have had a lot of issues that have had to be addressed. We don't know what other kind of issues might come up, but we certainly don't want in the middle of the cycle to have all these different issues popping up when there's no cohesive coordination of what's supposed to happen in general, much less if problems arise. Like we had people who signed up who they were turning down and saying they couldn't apply for those positions didn't exist, things like that. We've started working out the bugs, and a lot of the other neighborhood councils have also worked out bugs with the city clerk's office. Changing now midstream could cause a whole bunch of repercussions that we can't even foresee. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ivan Spiegel, followed by Didi Audette.
Yes, hi. Ivan Spiegel. I'm the parliamentarian at the Venice Neighborhood Council. I want to thank both of you for doing this. Mr. Krikorian, you've in very little time emerged as our best friend on the council, and I would like to publicly thank you for that. And please continue. I think the light bulb went off when you said you mean next Tuesday. Just real quickly on one of the legal issues that started to be brought up. We had a whole elections page on our bylaws, and it came out. When we were told the city clerk was going to do this, we were told to remove that from our bylaws. It's now gone, and there's been another edict, which is that Dunn said, you cannot make any more bylaws amendments until after your election. So now we can't even put it back in. So if you wanted a Machiavellian way to get rid of the neighborhood councils and get us to term out, this would be it. So please continue this, all right?
Hi.
Our next speaker is Didi Audette, followed by Dr. Wiseman.
Yes. Thank you. I'm here today to ask you, do you know what reserve fund this item is destined to appear in? Will it be for the elections process? Will it be for the city clerk? Or for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment? And that's the problem, which I brought to you before, down in City Hall. We need standardization of our accounting methods and proper nomenclature so that someone like me who looks at your agenda will know exactly where that money is going to go. Thank you very much.
Well, and in brief response to that, ma'am, I think the clear intent of the motion was not that the savings would be held in reserve funds for the neighborhood councils, but rather that it would go to the city's general fund, reserve fund.
Well,
so
that would be nice to have it on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Wiseman, welcome. And then our next speaker after Dr. Wiseman will be Joanne Ivanic Garb.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see the sense of the direction we're going in this meeting. Sounds like we're making some progress. The biggest amount of progress is going to come eventually when the power and the strength and the resources that are sitting in this room and in the neighborhood councils are fully engaged in working with the city. We certainly need to bring more volunteerism. Past experiences with elections, there was a lot of volunteerism to make it work. Every issue that comes before the city is full of that. We have a variety of recommendations which need to be considered and done in a transparent and open way, and that's what neighborhood councils are all about. We look forward to working with you. The volunteers of these groups are enormous and must be, I think, engaged now. We need them more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
On time.
Less than 2 minutes, Doctor. That's amazing.
It was less than a minute.
Yeah.
That's right, less than a minute.
Our next speaker is Joanne Ivanic Garb, followed by Jay Handel if he's returned, and that is the final speaker I have on item number 1.
Okay, Joanne Ivanic Garb, West Hills Neighborhood Council. I'd like to tell you my experience. On December 4th, they had a candidates forum in Winnetka at the Recreation Center. And a whole big bunch of us went there thinking that we were going to have somebody there telling us what to do, how to do this, da-da-da-da-da. We went there and there were 11 tables for the 11 different neighborhood councils with 2 representatives from the city clerk's office per table, so that's 22 people. I went up to the West Hills table. She asked me to see my driver's license. She asked me to show on a map where my home was to verify that I was a resident of the West Hills Neighborhood Council. I looked at her and I asked her, do you not know what a stakeholder is? She had no clue. This is my concern, that people are going to come in and they say that I'm a stakeholder in West Hills. Like people from Bell Canyon, there's no services out there. They would have to come into West Hills to go to the grocery store. So I see some problems, and could be voters' disenfranchisement.
Okay, thank you. Has Jay Handel returned?
No, he's not here, I guess.
All right. Well, that's the final speaker card that I have for item number 1. My recommendation will be that this committee recommend to the council to receive and file the Smith-Rosendahl motion relative to a proposed ordinance removing the city clerk from the neighborhood council election process. Number 2, that the council direct the clerk to identify whether there are potential cost-saving activities that might reduce the $1.5 million remaining to be spent to conduct the 2010 neighborhood council elections and report back to this committee. And further direct that if there should be any ability to realize savings at the end of the elections, that those savings be returned to the general fund. And then third, to request that Dunn, the CLA, the CAO, and the city clerk, in consultation with the city attorney, Bonk, and the neighborhood councils, report back to this committee in 120 days on a potential framework that will allow neighborhood councils to run their own elections in 2012, which would include basic election procedures to help guide that process.
I'll support that. Just a clarification, the receive and file, is that as strong as if we vote no on that particular item that they wish? Which would be...
Well,
I'd be more inclined to vote no versus receive and file to send a clear message that we don't support it.
Well, you know what? I'll take that as a friendly amendment. and that's what the recommendation will be. Thank you very much, Mr. Zine. We're trying to be graceful and still achieve the same result, but I'm with you on that.
I think the message needs to be very
I think it will actually create a clearer recommendation from this committee and from the public, and so I thank you for that suggestion, and without objection, that will be the recommendation of this committee. Thank you all very much. That brings us to item 2. It will be my recommendation that we continue that item until the next meeting, but we do have cards on it, and I am prepared to take public comment on item 2 at this time for anybody who still wishes to offer it. And our first speaker on item number 2 would be Glenn Bailey, if you wish, Mr. Bailey. And no presentation by Dunn? Correct. That will be next week, but if you'd like to offer comment now, you certainly can.
Oh, you could pass if you wish.
No,
Either
no,
way.
no. I always like to hear the presentation by the department before I make comments. But
you can make comment next week as well.
But I will say that with regards to the bank card system, there has been, as you know from the audit, the controller's audit, there have been issues about the petty cash withdrawals exceeding the $500 per month. That's been eliminated. No more cash. The bank card restrictions. I've brought to the Dunn's attention and the Bonk Commission about the split transactions, the bank card being used time and time and time again for the same vendor day after day after day. I did that 2 years ago. No action was taken, and now the controller comes up with that in there. It seems to me in this day and age of technology, et cetera, that there could be strong restrictions put on the bank cards for protections. Only those expenditures that are approved, authorized, and if there's an exception, you either do the demand warrant or you do something else. But put in the things that it'll cover 95% of the time.
Thank you. Next speaker on item number 2 is Barry Johnson, followed by Chris Rowe.
Hi, I would just ask that you continue the bank card system for the vast majority of neighborhood councils who have done so diligently and honestly without any type of errors. Our neighborhood council uses it all the time. I understand there's maybe 5 or 6 that have had problems, and I would suggest that you maybe find a system for penalizing those 5 or 6 and maybe take it away for 5 years or something to that extent. But for those of us who use it honestly all the time, I think it is something that works well for us, and we need to keep it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you begin, Ms. Rowe, for the sake of the record, it occurred to me that I don't think we identified item number 2. And even though we're continuing it as an action item, I think we probably need to identify it for the record.
I'm sorry.
I know the feeling.
Item number 2 is the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to provide a report relative to the Neighborhood Council Bank Card System Enforcement Policy.
Thank you. Now our next speaker on that item is Chris Rowe, followed by Dee Audette, and that is the last speaker I have on item number 2. Oh, okay, okay.
Chris Rowe, West Hills, and again, speaking on behalf of self. I think I brought this to you last week. The debit cards are so important. Not only are we using them for our elections right now for outreach, but as I pointed out to you, so very important in times when our neighborhood councils have to help in an emergency situation. They have to go out and buy food or water for their community in the times of fire or floods or things like that. So there has to be a way, plus those cards don't cost as much as the demand warrant. There should be a way to monitor and create end-of-month statements. It should be something that is so transparent that it would be the best, management practices, in my opinion. Thank you. And you might want to increase the amount that you allow on it. Right now, it's at $1,000, I believe. You might want to increase that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Audette has left, I think. So that brings up Nina Royal.
Okay, I'm speaking for myself. I was also the treasurer. I think I've held every position there. I was the treasurer, and that was a nightmare. It takes a long time to get an invoice paid. It could take up to 3 or 4 months. And I also have a business, and neighborhood councils took out a full-page ad, $866 for 10 neighborhood councils. You divide that up, all those demand warrants, and then you have to wait 3 or 4 months before you get paid. A little business like me can't afford to do this. I mean, if I don't get paid for what I'm doing now, it's going to go under because I'm only from one paycheck to the next. We need to make it simple. If you do demand warrants, my God, it's going to encumber everyone because our neighborhood council requires 2 signatures before it's submitted, and we need to do the requisitions first, then the demand warrants. You're looking at a lot of time, and if you're doing demand warrants for $5, $10, $15, it's ludicrous. That's not good practice.
All right, well, that's the final speaker on item number 2. It will be the recommendation without objection to continue this item until next week. Thank you, Mr. Zine, and that brings up our public comment period. I have 3 speakers right now. The first will be Michael Cohen, followed by Glenn Bailey.
I wanted to speak about the bond.
You come to the mic, please.
About the reorganization. I know it's going to be on the agenda next week, I think.
That's fine. It's within our jurisdiction. You can talk about whatever you want.
And it is, structure is everything. I mean, the British Army, and the Roman Army was so powerful because of their structure. Have you looked at the proposed inclusion of Dunn into CDD? Should be called Dunn/CDD, actually, under the charter. You have basically a general manager position that's under the assistant general manager for CDD. If you recall, at our last Enon meeting, the Benbow, Mr. Richard Benbow, I believe, I got the distinct impression he didn't even want the neighborhood councils there. So now you're going to have several levels removed, and you could also have Bonk under the assistant general manager. I looked at the CDD website, and there's some very good projects I think that would mesh very well with neighborhood councils because we're talking about outreach and a lot of it. But gosh, I got the very distinct impression that there are many functions of CDD that can push neighborhood councils in the direction they do not want to go very, very easily. And of course, we don't have the time to discuss it. This is something you have to look at very, very carefully. Do you have a copy of the?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
And did you say it was going to be on the? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, followed by Dr. Wiseman.
Good afternoon. I just want to encourage this committee, since it seems to be the only game in town, to have a continuous oversight during the next 4 months with regards to the neighborhood council elections and city clerk. I think that there should be an opportunity it should be on your agenda for an ongoing report from City Clerk, an opportunity for neighborhood councils in each region to give you an idea. And frankly, I have seen some very disturbing things besides what I mentioned to you about the discrepancy of there being volunteers and then only to find out there are no volunteers for Region A and no outreach. I've also found that they have showed up at neighborhood councils with the election procedures, the last neighborhood council meeting prior to the deadline that they would be submitted. Also, I have found that they violated their own policy number 17 in establishing a polling place that was the home of one of the neighborhood council members, which is a violation. It's not an unbiased location. So I think there's probably just the tip of the iceberg here, and I think you should put it on your agenda so that these things can be brought forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Wiseman, followed by Chris Rowe.
Thank you, sir. I hope that the discussion on item number 2 will also have public comment available.
We will.
Good, thank you. The issues here are so many, and I've handed you a copy of the generation of this is the data of the city controller on the cash flow. She sounded the alarm last December that we were likely to run out of money by the end of this year if we continued without change. All of this is an effort to make those changes so we won't run out of those funds. But what they also show is a need for some other issues that need to be brought forward immediately. Pushing the DWP's money from May up to July will let us decrease the trend by an estimated $200 million. Pushing other things around to decrease that trend is going to be critical, and I hope we can consider that either in this committee or in other locations, because there's a great deal to be obtained. This is only one example of a suggestion from the neighborhood councils, and you're going to get a lot more of them from the budget representatives, and even as we take them to the mayor, we'll bring them to you too.
Thank you very much. As of now, the final speaker I have for general public comment is Chris Rowe. If anybody else would like to speak, please bring up a card before she concludes. Ms. Rowe.
Thank you. Chris Rowe, West Hills, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself again. I was at Bonk today, and they mentioned 501s or nonprofits taking over control of our neighborhood council system. And as our mayor's representative was speaking, he mentioned a name of a particular group that I'm familiar with. And then I started thinking, well, I happen to know someone that was a lobbyist for that particular group. And I thought, gee, neighborhood councils, we're supposed to be independent. We are not supposed to be involved with lobbying. We are supposed to be highly ethical. We take the state ethics training and everything like that. So I just want to remind you that as you think about who's supposed to be housing us and keeping us in line, you want to make sure that it's not a group that has a conflict of interest in some way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If there's no other speakers, at 11 minutes to 5, we are adjourned on time and under budget.
Congratulations. Thank you.